Hey guys, Sue's here. Welcome back to another Keto Dinner Ideas video. If you're new here, we make these every single week and we try to film 4 different keto recipes each week to help motivate you to get in the kitchen and get your keto meal prep on. If this is your first time with us, please consider hitting that subscribe button and joining the crew. Let's get into the video. First up this week, made some air fryer bacon wrapped chicken with some Rutabaga fries. So to start with, I just took a Rutabaga. This is going to be pretty waxy when you get it. Just go ahead and wash and get the wax off as well as you can and cut the ends off of each side so that you have a flat surface to work with on each. Just helps stabilize it so you can peel it easier. So then I'm putting it on one of the flat surfaces and using a regular vegetable peeler to just get that skin off, and then I'll flip it over and get the other side and any remnants that I missed. Then we're going to slice it up. Now I used a mandolin to slice some of these, but Rutabaga is so hard to slice that my mandolin couldn't even do it that well. I really need to buy a knife just dedicated to freaking Rutabaga. But after I slice it into medallions, I'm just stacking them to make my cuts fewer and cutting them into little sticks in shapes of like fries. Now I'm piling all of those into a big bowl and putting probably about a tablespoon of avocado oil on them and just tossing that around with my hands until they're fully coated. I did take a rimmed cookie sheet, lined it with nonstick foil, and I'm just putting all of my Rutabaga fries onto it evenly, sprinkling them with some sea salt, some ground black pepper, and some Old Bay seasoning because I love the flavor of it. And I'm going to pop these into a 400-degree oven for 45 minutes. I'm not going to flip them, turn them, anything. Next, taking some bacon. I am just going to separate this out and just use half of it. I am just eyeballing this, but again, just measure for whatever you're doing. Now I'm taking some chicken. This is probably about 2 pounds of cut up chicken breast. It's about in 1-inch size chunks. I did buy this pre-cut frozen chicken and just thawed it and stuck it to the side, so my sizes kind of vary a little bit. Just with the soaring prices of meat right now, it was actually just cheaper to buy the pre-cut kind than it was to cut up regular chicken breast. But because my pieces are so small, I'm going to cut my bacon into 4 sections, and then I'm sticking those to the side, grabbing just some regular wooden toothpicks that are pointy on each end. And then I'm taking a piece of chicken and taking a piece of bacon and wrapping it and just sticking a toothpick through it. Obviously, there's some cross-contamination here with these toothpicks, so any that I don't use for this, I will be throwing out. And just showing you guys one more so you can kind of see. And as I get them rolled up, I'm just sticking them to the side in a paper plate. And I'm just going to repeat this process with all of them. And this looks more tedious than it was. It really was pretty quick and easy to get all of these done. Here they are. Now I'm going to cook these in my air fryer. I'm sure you could bake these in the oven. They would be just as good, but I'm spraying my air fryer with some nonstick spray. I preheated it to 400 degrees before I even got started, and then I'm just putting my bacon wrapped chicken pieces in there. I'm gonna do 3 different batches to cook these, but I'm gonna cook each batch for 10 minutes. So I'm gonna put this in for 5 minutes, and when that goes off, I'm just gonna take some tongs and flip my chicken over. You don't have to do this, but I wanted to make sure my bacon got extra crispy on both sides. And I'm gonna stick it back in the air fryer for another 5 minutes, and like I said, I'm gonna repeat this for 3 batches to get all of my chicken done. Here are my Rutabaga fries out of the oven. Of course, these would be more crispy if you cooked them on a cooking rack, but I don't have an oven safe rack. Here it is plated up. This was super delicious. I didn't add extra seasoning to my chicken for these, and the bacon really gives it all the flavor you need. I was making this as kid friendly as possible for my baby and toddler, but you could really play around with this recipe and put whatever kind of seasoning on your chicken you wanted, and it would be awesome. Next up, I threw together this fabulous, healthy, awesome meal. And for those of you that were asking for something that was more pescatarian, this is a great recipe for you. So to start with, I took about 24 ounces of Keto wild caught salmon. I buy this in huge bags frozen at Costco. I thawed those out, and I'm just taking a paper towel to kind of get any of the excess moisture off of the top of the salmon. Now I'm sprinkling a little bit of sea salt on top of this, and I'm gonna stick the salmon to the side while I get started on my red chili oil. So to a cast iron over medium heat, I'm adding about 3/4 a cup olive oil, along with 2.5 teaspoons of red pepper flakes, half a teaspoon smoked paprika, a half a tablespoon caraway seeds, a tablespoon of crushed coriander, and a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. And then I'm just whisking this together over that medium heat until it starts simmering and gets nice and fragrant. To that hot oil, I'm going to add my salmon with the skin side down. I do have my oven preheated to 300 degrees, and I'm just immediately taking a spoon and putting some of that hot oil and seasoning over the salmon, just basting it with the oil. And I'm gonna pop this whole thing in the oven for 25 minutes total, but we're gonna pull it out halfway and rebaste our salmon. And I do recommend these little silicone handles. If you cook with cast iron, years ago I accidentally grabbed the handle. Just your muscle memory will make you do that. So now my cast iron all lives in little silicone handles, and I always have those linked in the description box too if you've never seen them. Now, as you saw, I did baste it again halfway through, and then when I took it out a final time, I coated it with oil again before adding a cup of feta cheese just over the top of all of it while it's still in that hot pan. And then to that, I'm adding about 1/4 of a cup of Italian flat leaf parsley that I just washed and drained and kind of broke apart with my fingers and just let that wilt a little bit with that heat. And to serve this up, I just have my salmon fillet here with the feta and parsley coating, and then I sliced a little bit of English cucumber on the side and drizzled it with that spicy oil that we made that the salmon cooked in, and this was absolutely delicious. The coolness of the cucumber balances out the extra spiciness of the oil that's on the fish, and it's the perfect combo. And I know some people don't like leftover fish and don't like to heat it up the next day and say it stinks the house up and everything, but this did store well and reheat, and I found it just as lovely the next day. Next up, our fat kid meal of the week. So this was gonna be like spicy beef keto hot pockets, and of course I will link the original recipe down below that inspired it, although I used a totally different recipe for the dough, and I think next time I would change up the filling a little bit. But to start with, in a large saute pan over medium heat, I did melt a tablespoon of butter. Into that I'm adding 1/4 of a cup of chopped up onion. After that softens a little bit, I'm adding a heaping teaspoon of minced garlic and just stirring that up until it's all kind of softened up some and nice and fragrant. To that, I'm adding a pound of ground beef and using my meat chopper upper I always have linked to break that apart and get that nice and brown. To that, I'm adding 1/4 of a teaspoon of sea salt and 1/4 of a teaspoon ground black pepper and just working those seasonings into my meat. To that, I'm adding 1/2 tablespoon of chopped green chilies. I'm just using this kind right here. And what I don't use of those chilies, I'll just take out of the can and drain the juice and actually just freeze them so I can break them apart for other recipes. To that, I am adding a teaspoon of sriracha sauce and a teaspoon of liquid aminos. And once I have that all mixed in and cooked down for a few minutes, I'm adding a cup of spinach, and I just used frozen chopped spinach for this, and I'm just going to mix that around in there until it's nice and wilted, and then stick this mixture to the side and get started on our dough. So for our dough, like I said, I'm using a totally different recipe than what's in the recipe that's linked. I am taking 1/4 of a cup of almond flour and adding 3 tablespoons of coconut flour to that, along with a teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/4 of a teaspoon pepper, and about 1/8 a teaspoon of sea salt. And then I'm just gonna whisk all of these dry ingredients together and stick them to the side while we get started on the dough part. So for that, I'm taking 1.5 cups of mozzarella cheese in a microwave safe dish, adding 4 tablespoons unsalted butter and 1 ounce of cream cheese. I'm gonna microwave this for 1.5 minutes. The reason I love this recipe is because the butter just makes the dough so much easier to work with. So then I'm mixing it up a little bit and popping it back into the microwave for 30 seconds, pulling it back out, mixing it yet again, and it's still a little stringy, so pop it back in one final time for 30 more seconds. And when it comes out, I'm giving it one little mix to make sure it's nice and liquidy, and then we're gonna add in our dry ingredients to this and mix those in really well. And I do like to use my spoon to mix the dry ingredients in as well as I can and give that cheese mixture a chance to cool off a little before I add my egg. And just one large egg to it. And then I'm gonna mix that in with my spoon some before I get in there with my hands. Now, as I've said about this dough mixture in previous videos, look how easy it is to work with. I don't have any flour or any oil on my hands, and you can see the dough is not sticking to my hands at all. It's so malleable. Adding the butter to the cheese mixture and the little bit of cream cheese just makes it so much easier to work with and so much tastier. So you don't even need a rolling pin because it's just that easy to work with. So just in a cookie sheet on parchment paper, just using my hands. Again, I don't have to oil them or anything. Look how easy this dough is to work with. And I'm just mashing that out to the size I want. I think it would be really cool to make individual Hot Pockets with this recipe, and you could even freeze them and bake them later as needed. But for my purposes, for just my husband and I eating this for the week, I'm just making one large, almost like calzone shaped dish. So I'm just spooning some of that mixture in there. One thing I will say I wish I would have done with this recipe is added cheese or some type of filler so that when I slice this apart after it was cooked, it would stay together a little bit better. So keep that in mind if you make this recipe. So I'm putting almost all of my meat mixture in there, and I'm folding my dough over, kind of mashing it in and using my parchment paper to flip it. And then I'm just gonna seal this with my fingers and get a fork, and I'm just gonna crimp the edges like you would a pie crust. I'm also gonna vent the top, and I'm kind of putting my little slits in the top in the places where I would slice it to serve it. And then I'm gonna pop this whole thing into a 400-degree oven for 25 minutes. And here's what it looks like when it comes out. Love how golden brown and crispy this turned out. And here it is plated up. This was delicious. Like I said, in the future I will add cheese, and I really wish I would have added feta to this because I think it would have been great with the spinach mixture, and I already had some on hand. Last up this week, we threw together super quick low-carb pork stir fry. In a small dish to start with, I just have 2 tablespoons of liquid aminos. Into it I added 2 tablespoons of a dry red cooking wine. To that I'm adding a tablespoon of this yummy chili garlic sauce. I love this stuff so much, and if you've never tried it, I do have a link for it down below so you can see more details about that. To cast iron skillet over medium heat, I added a tablespoon of avocado oil. You could use olive oil for this or coconut oil. And then I'm adding a half a pound of cut green beans. These are just frozen ones that I thawed, and I am just cooking those enough to get a nice little scorch on them. You can see that color before removing them to a separate dish. Now my pan got super hot, this cast iron did, so I am gonna go ahead and cut my heat off for this so it can cool down, and add a half a cup of onion and a heaping teaspoon of minced garlic and 2 heaping teaspoons of minced ginger. And I'm just mixing those and cooking those down till my onion gets a little brown, everything gets nice and soft. And to that I'm adding a pound of ground pork, and again using my meat chopper upper to break that apart and just brown that all together. I did cut my heat back up to medium for this, and kind of stirring that in before adding that little sauce mixture that we made. Now I'm just going to mix this in and let it cook for about 5 minutes before adding my green beans back to it and kind of tossing those in because I wanted them to still be a little firm in texture. Now at this point I realized that I didn't add any salt or pepper. I was really in a rush making this, so I'm doing that at this point, but normally I would do that way earlier in my recipe. But make sure you don't forget your salt and pepper for flavor. So I'm adding that and then giving it a couple more turns and cooking so that can get in there really well, because I like my salt and pepper to actually be cooked into my food instead of just kind of sitting on top. And here it is plated up. I did cut up a little bit of green onion for the top of it. This was super delicious. It stored and reheated well. This is one of those recipes that the flavors really marinate and come together even more in the refrigerator, so I almost like it better the next day than I did the first night. So there you have it, super quick, especially for an easy keto weeknight meal or to prep ahead of time. That's this week's Keto Dinner Ideas video. I hope it gave you some motivation to get in the kitchen and get your keto meal prep on. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with any of your friends who are trying to follow a keto diet and live a keto lifestyle, or who are low carb. And make sure you're subscribed to our channel with the notification bells on so you never miss one of our weekly Keto Dinner Ideas videos. And until next time, bye guys.